Let me just shortly introduce Fidelia Ibekwe to you. It's my special pleasure to introduce her and to tell just few words about her. First of all, I met Fidelia several years ago in Lyon, where she used to work before moving to Marseille in France. She organized one conference, which I was really very keen to go and to listen, because it was about the philosophy of information. And the main motivation for myself was Luciano Floridi, who was there. So I said, oh, Fidelia succeeded in inviting Luciano Floridi, so she must be a good. And it proved that she is very good. So later on, we invited her to be our speaker at conference Libraries in the Digital Age, known as LIDA, in Croatia. And then we started to collaborate. Many of you might be aware of the fact that Fidelia is the editor-in-chief of the journal Education for Information. And she's very tough with, with this journal. She managed to get its rating higher up. And also Fidelia is known for her work on the history of information science in Europe. She published a book. She published many articles. I don't have time to talk about it, but the book she published was about how the information science actually developed in Scandinavian countries, in France, then in Spain and in Croatia. She got a scholarship for research, and she interviewed many people as much as she was able to do. So she was also in Zagreb, in Croatia, and we continued to collaborate. So when Cristobal asked whom we might invite to be our invited speaker, I realized that Fidelia is the best person for this purpose. So I'm very eager to hear what she is going to say to us today. Okay, Fidelia, floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Okay. Thank you very much, Tatiana, for this really kind introduction. Yeah, like you said, we've known each other for years and years. So you're like an old friend, and I keep meeting you in different parts of Europe. And I know you're retired, but you're working harder than those of us who are not retired. So I'm not sure what I will do when I'm retired, but if retirement is like yours, I better keep working because I have more time to enjoy myself. Anyway, really, really a big thank you for this invitation. I'm really honored. Also want to thank the host, Cristobal and his team for the very efficient way in which they handled all my travel arrangements. We've exchanged multiple emails to organize, all the travel, hotel accommodation. He's being willing to come and pick me up at the train station, even if it's only 5 minutes from the hotel, walking me back to the hotel, waiting for me, taking me to dinner, 8-course meal. That just beats it, because the previous similar project, Tatiana treated us to a humongous 7-course meal in Pisa, and so I'll have to keep following you guys, because I'm sure I'm going to get like the best meal of my life. Anyway, so here I am wearing 2 caps. One as a professor, like Tatiana said, in information and communication sciences, and I teach in a school of journalism and communication science. Before, I used to teach in a department of information and documentation when I was in Lyon, but now I have more of journalism, communication, media studies students. And talking of Luciana, I'm so proud to have been able to bring him to Lyon in 2011 for a small project that I had obtained, because here he is being the keynote speaker at ASIS International Annual Meeting of this year. So I got him to Lyon before the ASIS people got him to Salt Lake City in the US. I thought that was funny when I discovered that he was going to be the ASIS keynote speaker. So yeah, back to my the topic of my presentation. As you've seen it in the program, so I was invited here based on two things. One, like I said, being a teacher, like all of you here, teaching students in all kinds of situations and circumstances. Second, as editor-in-chief of a journal called Education for Information, and as you're working on educational matters, I think this journal is for you. So when you've worked and
okay, stay. Okay.
Sending along your results and submitting papers to the journal, you can easily find it on the web. And if you want the address, it's up here, and I can leave my slides so that you can easily go to the website and see what it's all about. Like I said, I teach in a school of journalism and communication, and I teach at different levels. I teach at the graduate level, which is the third year of university. We don't have the first and second year. We get graduate students who have done something else before coming to us. And then I teach at the master's level, masters 1 and 2, because our masters are spread across 2 years. And I'm also in charge of a master's track called Data, Information and Digital Communication, and especially of the option Digital Information and Communication Devices, which is mainly a master's track focused on giving students some level of data literacy, so that they can be able to face challenges posed by open and big data for business intelligence, knowledge discovery, as well as giving them competence in the management of digital communication projects in an environment that is interactive and mobile. So I don't have LIS students, really. I have students who come from anthropology, from communication studies, from marketing, from political science, from media studies, from all kinds of, humanities and social sciences. I do get the odd information documentation student, but it's like one out of many. So they are not really my core students anymore. But I do enjoy teaching these students, this new public. I think they're exciting. They're quite open to experiment with things. I'm sure you're familiar with this picture on the slide, which shows, I'm not sure, I think the image has disappeared. Yeah. Okay, yeah. So I'm sure this is an image that you're familiar with. Historically, mass higher education has been dominated by the written and oral modes of teaching, thus by a lecture-based instruction style that focus solely on 2 domains of intelligence. That is the verbal, linguistic, and the logical, mathematical, and has largely neglected other modes of learning, like the kinesics, visual, embodied, and emotional. Like many EU countries and possibly Asian, African countries, the dominant style of teaching in France is this one, the traditional professorial style, where the professor is professing on the stage, talking, and students sit passively in amphitheaters or in rooms, taking down notes. And then they try to imbibe, ingurgitate, and cram and revise for written exams. So they regurgitate, and then we grade them, and then off they go. If as instructors, as teachers, we're totally honest, we can acknowledge that this mode of delivering of course content can be unsatisfactory in certain circumstances. It does not encourage student engagement and interaction. It can lead to a high boredom factor. It can lead to high student dropout rate. It can lead to a low appropriation and understanding of the course content, aside from what's required of students to pass their exams. Once they have bagged their diplomas, they promptly forget about everything you said. I may not even use them in real life situations because the learning and the knowing never penetrated their consciousness. Something is happening with the, yeah.
He's not there.
It keeps coming and going. Anyway, maybe he doesn't like what I'm saying. So because the teaching, the way of teaching didn't really pierce the superficial layer of their consciousness. It did not form part of their lived experiences, their real life experiences, not something that touched their skin, their emotions, their senses. They didn't live it. They just heard it. They tried to put it somewhere in their intellectual realm, and then they probably read it once or twice to write your exams, and then that's it, Obviously, this is a bit of a caricature. I'm quite aware that, you have some really great professors who are wonderful on the stage and can wow their audiences. And, this kind of teaching has its uses, but there are certainly areas where it's not the best way of teaching content. And also, if we're being totally honest, we as professors are not always required to follow some training on pedagogy and on didactics as a prerequisite to being recruited as academic faculty. I didn't. I never had a single training on how to teach. Before I was thrust into the classroom, I had to swim or sink, So probably my first lectures were a disaster. They were awful. And it was across many, many years of trial and fail that I got to where I am today. So I made it up as I went along. I improvised as I went along, as opportunities, were created. So over the years of my career as teaching faculty in information and communication sciences, which is this discipline in which I am in France, I'm not in LIS, I'm in information and communication sciences. I had noticed that the students that I had were mostly motivated by get some competence, hands-on skills, and go out and work. That's what they want. They're not very interested in theory and anything abstract, unless you can demonstrate to them that these abstract concepts and ideas have some relevance to their contemporary situation and to the possible work placement that they will get. Thus, having to do a 3-hour weekly lecture in which, as a professor, I would just come and talk, and the students would just sit down and be taking down notes, was not my idea of fun and pleasure. I believe teaching should be fun and not be seen as something tiresome or tedious that we just have to get through. I don't know about you, but it affects me if I see on the faces of my students that they are bored or just checking their Facebook status or sending tweets while I'm talking. It does make me feel a little bit depressed. So I began to seek ways of making my theoretical lectures, that's those lectures that were focused mainly on theory of, ideas and abstract concepts. I began to search for ways to make them more engaging and more creative. And as I began this journey, I came across a couple of publications that showed me that I was not alone. Not only was I not alone, but I was relatively a latecomer to this issue. On this slide, I have put a diagram that I found in one of my readings, showing that not enough attention has been paid to fostering creative teaching strategies among students, but that there has been a growing awareness of the need to solicit other modes of learning than the oral and the written. And in this figure by Karen Babu in her book on Dancing Across the Page, she says, the model of experiential learning places the concrete experience or the artistic practice inside a continuous cycle of reflection. And she goes on, the researcher's body, the researcher or the student's body, engagement and awareness entails new questions about how we can develop in a new and creative way a research process based on an embedded construction of knowledge. So as I began to search for innovative pedagogies, I also came across other publications. For instance, this book, Arts Education, Building Creative Capacities, that was shown at the first UNESCO World Conference on Arts Education in March 2006, Arts-Based Method in Education Around the World by Chemi and Du, 2017, recalled the historic and theoretical foundations of arts-informed pedagogy and cited numerous handbooks published on arts education and creativity learning. So there had been other researchers who had researched this thing of how to bring in embodied learning. So it wasn't just me fumbling around, just making something up. This is research, that you can use arts and, arts in their full sense in the classroom. And according to Monica Pentasuglia, the word art and artistic were used in conjunction with inquiry in academic research as early as 1914 and the 1940s in a paper entitled "The Artist is Present, Arts-Based Research Perspective in Educational Research." So all these publications gave rise to a certain number of fields and concepts that are called scholatistry, art-oriented pedagogy, art-informed pedagogy, and art-informed research. And also being in Spain, I'm happy to cite your famous painter, Picasso, who is quoted as having said, "Paintings are but research and experiment. I never do a painting as a work of art. All of them are research. I search constantly, and there is a logical sequence in all this research." In other words, art is only a conduit of society, of a time, of a context. Art is not just art. Art is a way of expressing anything you want. Political message, ideology, your mood, anything. So it's a conduit, it's a canal. That means we can also leverage arts to express anything, concepts that we need our students to learn in our classroom. So that's how I began to dabble into this arts-oriented pedagogy. And to be totally, do a full disclosure, the person who actually made me take the plunge into arts-oriented pedagogy was a colleague from the University of Toronto, Jenna Hartel, from High School of Toronto. She was experimenting with something she called draw and write to help students get to grips with the abstract notion of information. How to teach what's information to students of information science. You can spend hours citing definitions. It would just glide on their skin. It doesn't mean anything, all those definitions. So she thought that she would leverage arts, draw and write. So she began to use this very light arts approach, whereby she had this protocol called the I-square protocol, a small I don't know how many inch by inch piece of paper with two sides. On the one side, students will draw their concept of information. And on the other side, they will write information is. So when I encountered Jenna in an ASIS conference where she explained this, I was fascinated. And I thought, oh, wow, I'm going to try this in my school, you know, to teach information and communication theories. Even if I didn't have solely information science students, I had communication and information. And I was grappling with how to define information and communication in a way that made sense to them. So I thought, oh, I'm going to adapt this. So I joined Jenna's international kind of group of researchers. And we began to experiment with this. So I quickly extended it to communication. So instead of information is, I had communication is, and then they drew. So what happened was that at the beginning of this 7-week, 3-hour weekly lecture on information and communication theories, I would have them draw their conception of communication in the first lecture. Before I've opened my mouth to say anything, they will draw it. And then they will write the definition on the other side of the paper. And I will collect all their drawings. Then I will do my professorial lecture, you know, the traditional lecture for 5 weeks. And then the 6th week will be a workshop where I will get them out of the amphitheaters and I will display all the drawings on long tables. And they will be divided into groups of 4 or 5 students. And I will give them as instructions to walk around their drawings and pick a subset, choose a subset of drawings that they would take pictures of, and weave a story using those drawings as a backdrop. And these stories have either to do with real life events where communication theories were at work, plausible events, or something entirely fictitious. So if we go to the website, you will begin to see some of the, oops, no, it's Firefox, okay. Some of the results of their work. So the drawings gave rise to a collection of C-squares. So instead of calling them I-squares, I call them C-squares because they are communication squares. I collected, you know, over the course of 3 years, I had like over 300 drawings. And it made sense to them. It made sense to them. But I felt that I wasn't really pushing this arts-oriented paradigm as far as I could. That just, you know, the drawings were not going far enough. So I went into storytelling. I told them that, you know, after choosing the drawings, they had to tell stories. And they did, you know, they either, you know, build their stories around an advertisement campaign. They use real life advertisements. You know, they found things happening in the real world where the theories I had exposited during my professorial lectures were at work, and they illustrated it in their drawings. One of the most impressive stories I came across is this one, called by the students Communication Satire, where they used the whole of Greek mythology, you know, the gods, different gods in the Greek pantheon, to show how communication has become kind of all-powerful, an all-powerful tool that you can use to do practically anything. So I won't go into the whole translation, but if you go on my website, you can read all about it. But, you know, they talked about Zeus, they talked about Poseidon, about Hades, about Hera, and all kinds of figures in the Greek mythology. And at the end, their conclusion was that we are living in a world invaded by information, but also by noise, where we only swear by ICTs. In this world where the mail has replaced letters, students, selfies, postcards, there is still hope because on the internet, sharing resists capitalism, etc., etc. But we are offering ourselves to social media for which we become consumer and producer. and we spent time there. And then they used an image of, how much time you've wasted of your life on social media. I'm just summarizing the story, but if you read all of it, if you go through different stages of, the power of communication, you will better understand the analogy they made between the theories I had explained in class and their story. So this became a highlight of the course, because they knew that they were not just going to sit there during the 21 hours I had to teach them over 7 weeks, that they were actually going to become engaged and do something. But still, I felt that something was missing. Okay, so they made silly little drawings and they told some nice stories, but is that really all there was to arts? I felt that I wasn't really drawing the full advantage. I wasn't really exploiting the arts, the creativity and the innovativeness of arts with this format. So I went into full-blown arts exhibition. And how that came about was that in the course of my readings for this course, I came across the Bauhaus movement, which I didn't know about. I was reading a book or, reading something about, the Second World War and propaganda. And I came across the book written by this professor from Stanford, Fred Turner, The Democratic Surround, Multimedia and American Liberalism from World War II to the Psychedelic 60s. So what this was about was that in my course, I teach them about how during the Second World War, the military and the political enrolled the scientists, researchers, to help with the war effort in order to win the Second World War. And this story was narrated in Fred Turner's book. So Fred Turner explained how the Bauhaus movement was founded in Weimar in Germany in 1919 by Walter Gropius, and how it was a total arts movement where, you could mix artisan, crafts with fine arts, with anything, with building, with architecture, with interior design. Just, there was no distinction in the specialties. So it was a political and ideological movement that was trying to build something out of the ashes of the First World War. But he had to leave Germany because of the arrival of Hitler. So this movement found its way in the US because eventually Gropius ended up in the US. So the influence of the Bauhaus philosophy began to spread in the US. And during Second World War, as Americans were looking for a way to enroll, to engage in the Second World War, the president, Roosevelt at the time, recruited social scientists. There were about 60 of them that were under an organization called the Committee for National Morale. And this committee was also looking for a way to protect Americans from fascism and Nazism, from being contaminated by this ideology. And they thought the Bauhaus was a good way, a good, approach because of the total arts philosophy that they had. They felt that if Americans could be inspired by the Bauhaus, which made it that you didn't have just one media, you didn't have just the hierarchical top-down way of functioning of mass media, which they felt was responsible for the takeover of Hitler of Germany because he had a mastery of the mass media. But then you had this kind of horizontal, multiple way communications with different media and surrounding you, that it will be a kind of democratic surround, which is why Fred Turner called his book The Democratic Surround, because what the intellectuals were proposing to Roosevelt as a way of protecting Americans from fascism was that they shouldn't be subjected to the mass media, which was top down, but that they should seek for ways to surround every individual with multiple media sources so that each person can choose his or her source of information. And in this way, people will not be formatted and will not become just obedient. soldiers like the SS, but will be democratic individuals that can reason because they would have chosen their source of information. So that was the idea of the intellectuals at the time. So going from explaining this to the students, I thought, oh, hold on a minute. Why don't we use the Bauhaus also as a means of exemplifying the communication theories that I was just explaining to them about? So it's a kind of cyclic construction that I had. So on the one hand, I was telling them about the Bauhaus in the class, in my lecture. And on the other hand, I was telling them, you are going to have to use the Bauhaus as a kind of background, a kind of foundation for your artwork. So it's something they've learned in the lecture, which they were going to leverage in order to showcase information and communication theories. So this is a kind of a 3-level thing. And I had no idea if it was going to work or not. I was throwing myself out. I was going out on a limb. I was kind of throwing myself in at the deep end. I'd never done this before. I couldn't draw to save my life. Like if you pointed a gun at me and say, okay, draw, you probably will have to shoot me because I can't draw. So I thought, wow, what am I doing? This might just fall flat and be a total failure. So I was as scared as my students were. They were like, Madam, but we don't know arts. I'm like, just trust yourself, just create. And I can tell you that when you give students that liberty to create, you will be surprised at what they can do. So this slide is just to recall the manifesto, the Bauhaus manifesto that Walter Gropius wrote in 1919. Architects, sculptors, painters, let us create a new guild of craftsmen without the class distinction that arise, an arrogant barrier between craftsmen and artists. Together, let us create the new structure of the future, which will one day rise toward heaven from the hands of 1 million workers, like the crystal symbol of a new faith. So in short, he was trying to create like a kind of, Babel Tower that will reach the heaven. And the idea was to create a new world where there were no discriminations, no barriers between different professions in the arts world. So once the students had been exposed to these ideas, then after the lectures, we had another workshop where they worked in groups, and then they went and created. And then we had the exhibition day. So there was an exhibition day where they came like during the same hours as when I would have been teaching them in the amphitheaters, and we mobilized the hall of the school, the space. So we're no more in amphitheaters. They were putting together their artwork in 3D in real life on a given day, like you would do if you're in a museum. So I'm going to show you some of the things that they did in the first years. So I'm a little bit clumsy with this computer, but yeah, okay. So we go to 2018. So in 2018, which was the first year in which I did this full arts exhibition, if you go to my website, you can really read about it, about their production. So they would all, after the exhibition, send me a 3-minute video of their art exhibition and a booklet that documents exactly why they built the artwork, what theories they try to illustrate in their scenario, explain everything. And one of the most impressive art displays that I had in the first year was this one on the Rwandan Genocide. Without, telling the story of the Rwandan Genocide, I will only just focus on the link between this background, this story as a background, and the information and communication theories. Is that they understood from my lectures that the Rwandan Genocide was in part possible because the Hutu government that instigated it was also able to weaponize the mass media. They used a radio called Radio 1000 Collines in French, a radio of 1,000 hills, on which the propagandists were the whole day chanting, singing, and exhorting the Hutus to go and kill the Tutsis by singing nice, pleasant songs, calling the Tutsis cockroaches, saying they had to exterminate the cockroaches. It sounded all fun, but it was very, very, very deadly and very vicious. So the students explained, leveraging the things that they had heard in my lecture about propaganda, leveraging cybernetics, leveraging other theories that they had researched themselves, which I hadn't talked about, to explain how the mass media was weaponized in this genocide. And then not only did they explain that very well, but they had a chronological frieze of the genocide. They had newspaper cuttings, pictures, quotations from different figures, political figures about the genocide. And then they had 3 computers in front of them with recordings of things. And they themselves were inside their own exhibition. They were wearing T-shirts with the names of some of the protagonists of the genocide. So it was a complete immersive experience. And throughout the different exhibitions that the students did, they were often inside their exhibition in a kind of a completely immersive approach. So to try and come now to the pandemic, which is why we're here. But I had to tell this, give you the background, because this didn't happen in a vacuum. I was already doing this before the pandemic hit. So when the pandemic hit, it took us by surprise, obviously, because in the autumn of 2019, we had no idea that we're going to go into lockdown. We didn't even have an idea that something was coming, and then all of a sudden it came. And then we thought, oh, in 3 months it's going to go away, and it didn't. And we thought, oh well, maybe a few deaths, and then it will be all over, and it wasn't. So little by little, the world was shutting down. So after the first 3 months of lockdown in France, which happened between March and June 2020, the French government decreed that universities and schools will reopen in face-to-face mode in September. So we all came back face-to-face mode. I forget if we were all masked in those first 3 weeks. Possibly, yes, we were masked. Because I remember my first experience of doing my lectures masked, but I did. But within only 3 weeks of reopening, we were ordered to return to a second lockdown. So the order from the French president came on a Friday, and I had this lecture on the Monday, like 2 days' time. I was going to give a lecture. And I'm like, oh my God, what on earth am I going to do? Because I've never taught online course before. Was always face-to-face. France is not one of those countries where, like in the US, they have a decades-old experience of online courses. We simply didn't. We're always face-to-face. The only help, if you can call that so, that our university gave us was, oh, by the way, we've got a professional Zoom license. So you all have, you can all go and set up your professional Zoom account. That's it. And after that, you're on your own. Okay. So I spent the weekend being stressed out, thinking, how on earth am I going to give this? Because I was still in the professorial part of my lecture. I hadn't finished yet. I had only taught two and a half of those theories. I still had to finish explaining the rest. Anyway, after many sleepless nights, 2 sleepless nights, I found myself on a Monday morning in my home with my computer on, Zoom on, and my students logging on. Now, I must admit that I was not a complete novice when it came to ICTs. In my thesis, I had done text mining, and so I had, I was kind of at ease with ICTs. I wonder what it would have been like if I was someone who had like technophobia. But anyway, I was able to set up my Zoom account and rapidly revise what I knew of Zoom so far, which wasn't much. And I delivered my lectures via Zoom. I explained to the students that now they would have to do their arts project somehow at a distance, because there was no hope that we would meet physically in the school premises on the D-Day for them to set up the arts exhibition, which until then, the last 3 years happened in real life. I said, well, we're not gonna abandon this whole thing. You're gonna have to be innovative and creative again. So not only do they have to do artwork, but they have to do it in such a way that they minimize contacts between themselves and still do something that will resemble what I expected them to do. I was aware that I was really giving them a heck of a challenge, but somehow I'm glad that I didn't back down. I didn't drop it, because it's quite incredible how agile and imaginative students can be. The young people are absolutely amazing if only we trust them. We need to let go some of the control and just relinquish and give it to them. And it's amazing what they bring back to you. So they all worked together. They were chatting, Zooming, doing all kinds of things, using all the technology to be in contact in their group, in their project groups. And they were using, online video creation software that I don't even know how to use, to do some video and photo montage of things that they wanted to put in their project. Some built their artwork physically, because I told them you could build it and showcase it in your neighborhood on, like the staircase, like the garden. If you think it's okay to do that, you can showcase it in your neighborhood and let people participate and see it, and then take pictures, film it, and send it to me for validation, which is what they did. And as an added constraint, 2020, as you all know, was marked by two things: the COVID pandemic and systemic racism. So I said, guys, these are the two topics I want you to work on. So I want you to focus on this in your project. You can choose. And they did. So all the exhibit of 2020 was either on systemic racism or the COVID pandemic. And it was all about how the information and communication around, for instance, the COVID pandemic was a mess. Like the propaganda, the conspiracy theories, the hammering by the mass media of, different pundits. And so they did an absolutely amazing job of bringing this to life in their artwork. And again, I don't really have time to show you all of it, but I think it's worth a detour if you go on my website, because I've tried to leave this artifact so that even if you were not there, you get a sense of what they built from the videos, the 3-minute videos, from the description of their booklets, which I will translate and just get the essential and put it on my website. It was amazing. It didn't fail because of the pandemic. I think the pandemic threw in other challenges, which they picked up. They picked it up, they were agile, and they used all the technology that was at their disposal, open source technology, and they just created a lot of things. Some were digital, entirely digital artifacts, but some were physical that they built and then took pictures and videos of. Now, in order for you to perhaps I hope gain something from my talk, some of the observations I made of my lectures during the lockdown that I did via Zoom was that, paradoxically, whereas when they were in the amphitheater, they were shy, they couldn't just, some of them didn't just want to raise up their hands and ask questions. They were asking a whole lot more questions via Zoom, using the chat. There was a lot more interactions of my students via the chat box. And interestingly enough, they were answering each other. Because when you're in a Zoom and you're the host, you're the presenter, you can't, and you're sharing your screen. You know how Zoom does? It puts all the menu on top. You don't even see it anymore. So I wasn't seeing the chat box anymore, because I would go on my long, exposition of ideas. And for maybe 15 minutes, students may have been asking questions and I wasn't aware of it because I couldn't see it. I couldn't see them. So they were answering each other. They were said, oh, I think she meant this. Oh, I think this is what she said about this. And then when eventually I saw the chat box, I'm like, oh, they've already answered it. So in a way, it showed me that some had understood what I was saying because they had answered their colleagues. I didn't have to do it. So that was pretty exciting. So I won't say that my experience of teaching during lockdown was bad. I think it, because of the suddenness of it all, I was panicked. But after the moment of panic, and I just came down to, a rational way of thinking, I did manage to do my lectures pretty well. And I think that students followed as best as they could and interacted even more. The only regret being that I couldn't get to know them as much as I would have if I had been able to deliver my lectures face to face. So I was able to do all that, despite the difficulty of the pandemic. To move towards my concluding comments, after the first year of experimenting with this arts-oriented pedagogy, I wanted to see if it was worth anything, if students felt that it was something that was that helped them to better appropriate the course content. Because I'd also read that some students could be very reticent. Some were really scared. They said, well, I've never done this. They were stressed out. I had to really reassure them that I was not an art connoisseur. I knew nothing about arts. And my judgment wasn't on the art itself. My evaluation was on how the arts help them as a conduit to illustrate information and communication theories at work in a scenario. So I was looking about the plausibility of the communication theories that they showcased through using the arts, not the artwork itself, because I didn't know how to do arts. But so I did do a poll, a survey of what they felt about the arts-oriented pedagogy with the first batch of the 2018 class of students. And this is what came out, which I had published, by the way, in a paper about a year ago. So basically, as you can see on this summary of the table, the poll showed that many of them had some prior knowledge of information and communication theories, but most of them had never encountered arts-oriented pedagogy. Like 65% had not encountered it before. When I asked if the arts-oriented approach enhanced the appropriation of the contents of my course, 77% totally agree. Moderately agree, 18%, a bit, 3%, not at all, 1.4%. So if you add the moderately and the totally agree, you get a very high score of students who said it helped. It helped us to understand the course content. When I asked, should it be incorporated into other courses when possible, because I'm not saying everyone should do it, totally agree, 1.5, yes, 71.2, no, 10. So it must be the no must be the ones who don't want to be pulled out from the safety and the comfort of just sitting behind their chairs in the amphitheater. But, by and large, 3/4 want it to be, used whenever possible. So that's basically what I've come to share with you in this presentation. And I also leave you with a list of publications that I have made based on this experiment with arts-oriented pedagogy. And once again, I thank you very much for having me and listening to me. And I hope that it will somehow illuminate your reflections. And I'll be very happy to answer any questions. Or if anybody is tempted to take the plunge, I'll be more than happy to accompany you. I've done it. This is my 4th edition of my Bauhaus exhibition, and they've just completed the 2021 Bauhaus, this time physically. So it's going to go on my website when I have time to translate and upload all their, yeah. So thank you.
Thank you, Fidelia, very much for your presentation, which really was inspirative. And I'm sure that some of you who never experienced this approach may be motivated to learn more and to go deeper. I remember myself, if you allow me to say that when I was at ACES conference in the States, Jenna Hertel organized a workshop on the base of this graphics. And the workshop was mostly for us, for university professors, teachers, yeah. And we were playing like children, and that was so really interesting. And we get to know each other much better during this half an hour of the workshop than all the rest of the conference. So it has potentials, but I would add that we are talking all the time about teaching which has to be innovative. The students have to be creative and so. But if the teacher doesn't have this feeling, this need to constantly look to improve his presentations, his work with students, then innovativeness is just a word on the paper, nothing more. So please, if you have any question, please raise your hands or come here if you are in the presence here. Or do we have, Anya, do we have questions from the
Martina has said that his notes are plenty of bursting of notes.
Sorry,
It's not a question; it's just a comment.
Okay.
Comment?
Yes,
Yeah.
how said that his blog note, his notes is plenty of.
She's taking a lot of notes. Good.
Oh, this is. Yeah, I'm not surprised that Martina said so, because when she's interested in something, she always prepares notes, makes notes, and she will definitely go further and investigate. Yeah, no?
Not yet.
Not yet. Do we have Cristobal? Yeah. Angel?
Hello. Thank you very much for the presentation, which was very, very interesting. Then I had different questions coming to mind. For instance, Tatiana was saying that probably some students, and you have also said that, are reluctant to this experience, and they say that they only want to see the work innovative in paper, but they don't want to experience it. But I think the same happens to lecturers, to ourselves. So what do you think it's important to engage students in this kind of activity? Because I think if you present this to my students, they would say, no, I prefer to go back to the traditional way of learning. So what do you think is important to engage students in this kind of experience or experiment?
So I think there are two things. Two things that might sound contradictory at face value, but actually aren't. I think as humans, we are rational. But if you want to live life fully, at some point we have to take some risks, right? So I would say caution and a dose of caution mixed with a dose of what the French call audace, being audacious, you know, like take a chance, trust them, relinquish something. You would notice that this isn't a, you know, I never went into full-blown arts-oriented pedagogy all the time. It's like 30% or 25%. I still do my lectures, right? So I want to make sure that they still have the content, because I'm not sure if I said, okay, the whole of the class will be arts-oriented pedagogy and we're going through arts. Maybe one day I will get there, but not yet. I'm not there yet. For now, I kind of, it's like I opened a part of the volume of hours that I have. I took out 6 hours for this. The rest is still professorial, it's still lectures. But I want to be able to evaluate what they heard from me, and not only evaluate it, but see how they're able to cast it into current real life situations or historical situations in order to see if they understood, because no amount of written exam is going to tell me that. But if they're able to say, okay, actually, if the bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima happened, it's because there was an error in transmission of something that the Prime Minister of Japan said, which came out wrongly. So this is Shannon. They're able to relate that to Shannon. Channel noise during the that is huge. Than just me talking about Shannon, you know, Shannon entropy, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't mean anything. But once you understand that something of the magnitude of Hiroshima happened, partly because there was an error in translation, and they had archival articles to show it to me. My students did it. They did a project, arts-oriented pedagogy project, in which they showed this newspaper. They found a newspaper article from one American journalist. I didn't even know about it, but they found it because they had to do this project. And they showed me that, in fact, there was an error of translation. That is, they will never forget this. They will forget everything I said about entropy, everything, because it's so boring and it doesn't mean anything. Believe me, it only means something when you have a lived experience of entropy. If the level of entropy is too high, it's chaos, it's the devil, according to Weiner. I can tell them Norbert Weiner said entropy is the devil. They don't care. But if you show them a real life experience where entropy is at work, that will sink in for life. For life. So that's the thing. I think you need to see what amount of risk am I willing to take? That maybe the first year is not going to be great, but it doesn't matter. You're trying something creative. You're trying something different. You're thinking out of the box. You're not completely throwing yourself at the deep end, because you're still giving the lecture just to make sure that everybody has approximately the same level of knowledge that your curriculum requires, you know, as a professor, that you give them. Because not all my students knew about this theory. Some did, some didn't. And even the ones that did said, Madam, you have a different way of explaining it. We haven't had this way before. Yours is more historical. Because I'm always conscious that history, the context determines how people did things. You know, if you say people did things 50 years ago or had ideas, you only understand the ideas if you go back to the context, the history. So, yeah, so I don't know if I've answered your question, really. I think I went off on something a little bit, but we can talk later, yeah.
Okay. Micro.
Yes, it's open.
Oh.
That's better. We have another comment from Dora Sales. Thanks for this inspiring lecture. Finally, there is much to explore regarding visual methods. Thanks, Fidelia.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. It has been fantastic. We are enjoying it. But imagine at the same term, the students have 5 subjects and 5 teachers like you, and all 5 propose so engaging work. We have a problem, I think. Maybe you can contrast my position, but we have done in this project, we have started to do a pilot focus group. What happened during the lockdown is that more or less some teachers started to think, well, let's to test new things, and these things sometimes representing extra load of work, extra work. So the students we have here too that were in Osijek in summer school, in this pilot that was done, they said all from Bulgaria, from Germany, from Spain, from Croatia, that during the lockdown, the amount of work supposed they have to do increased. What is your opinion?
Yeah, that's life. That's life. Please, can you put back my screen? I want to show, if possible. If it's not possible, that's. I wanted to say that there's a second course where I experiment with arts-oriented pedagogy. It's a course called information visualization. I could easily have done it the normal way. They come into a computer room, they sit down, we open one software, Infogram, Canva, Tableau, you have loads and loads, and they will pull up, bar charts, pie charts, lines. We do that too, I do that. But I begin by telling them that data is all around us. Data is performative. That's when you quote a number, you say 60% of people think this way, or there's 20% of unemployment in Spain. Whenever you quote data, you quote a number, you give the impression that the thing exists. So it's performative. And oh yeah, so you can see my screen now. So I also, in my attending conferences and workshops, I came across two very creative individuals. One is called Jose Duarte. He's a Colombian designer. And the second is Susan Jasco. She has a website called Data Cuisine, Susan Jasco. And she inspired me to implement, I'm not sure this is the right spelling. No, it's not, but anyway, I can find it and show you later on. She inspired me to implement this creative and innovative approach to data visualization, because data visualization, if you're not a geek, it can be pretty boring. When people show you in their talk, they show you all these graphs, Once you're out of the room, you forget it. But if the numbers, you've embodied it. You put it in things. You put it in fruits, put it in food, put it in cardboard. You build somebody with it, and you mount it, and you put it in a place where people pass, and you tell them to participate, to vote. Then it becomes embodied. You live it. So my students never complain that they have too much work, or if they do, I don't listen. They are here to work, not to, but the thing is, when they do this, they play. So they don't tell me they have too much work. They play, they create, they innovate, they step out from just sitting down, and they go and meet other students, and they talk to them, and they tell them to vote. Like this one is, when were you born? And this was stuck up in the hall of my school. When were you born, right? And when people passed, they put papers that students had prepared, they put it in a carton, different colors. They put it in the tubes. So at the end of the experience, we knew which was the most famous month of people in my school. When were you born? It sounds like nothing. And then this was, what are your means of information? What are your preferred means of information? They built this, they stuck it somewhere, and people voted. And then last year, in line with what I did in what I did in the other project, they also did some really fantastic things. Like this one is wonderful. This one is all about people's moods during the lockdown. Filmed herself and sent it to me, and I shared it with my colleagues, and they were absolutely blown away. All right. So I show my students that this is not just fun. It is fun, but it shows information in such a way that it becomes part of you. And thereby, it makes you change your habits. You know, like there are other creations, like what would you do in your neighborhood to make it clean enough? You install it in the garden and you make people vote. So they see it, they have voted, they are committed, you know? So this is just different ways to engage and to bring about change, not just fun. It's bringing about change and having fun at the same time. Isn't that wonderful? Isn't that one of the aims of teaching? Yeah. Learning, having fun, making good change for the whole world, you know, for our societies. I think that's what we should aim for.